Thanks for joining us today. I'm Becky Gallagher. I'm a joint degree candidate here at Yale SOM and FES. I'm going to introduce David Crane, who's our featured speaker, and Professor Marion Chertow, but just wanted to quickly thank the groups that made this event possible. So today's talk is part of the GE Colloquium in Sustainable Leadership. The Colloquium is a program of CBAE, which is the Yale Center for Business and Environment. It's established with the support of the GE Foundation in order to provide business leaders a forum to speak about the challenges and opportunities of making their businesses more sustainable. Thanks also to the FES Energy SIG, the SOM Energy Club, the Yale College Energy Club, and the Yale Climate and Energy Institute for their help promoting this event. So just a brief note about the format of the talk. It's going to be first a conversation between Marion and David, and then we'll open it up to questions. And it is live streamed, so just be sure to press the mic. Otherwise, it won't pick up on the video. So thanks. Professor Chertow is our moderator today. She's the hands-down expert in everything industrial symbiosis related. If you've studied industrial ecology, waste management, urban industries, business environment intersections here at Yale or even abroad, you definitely know Professor Chertow. She's a graduate of the Yale School of Management, and she's a professor of industrial environmental management at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. She's also appointed at Yale SOM and the National University of Singapore. She serves on the board of directors of the Alliance for Research in Corporate Sustainability, the External Advisory Board on the Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability at Ingersoll Rand, and she served as the elected president of the International Society of Industrial Ecology, which is her scholarly society, until 2015. David Crane is our guest this morning. Since becoming president and CEO of NRG Energy in 2003, he has led its transformation from a regional wholesale generation business into a national diversified energy company, Fortune 250. NRG is the largest independent power producer in the United States, with enough generating capacity, 52 gigawatts, to power 42 million homes. NRG is also a competitive energy retailer serving more than 2 million customers. In February, NRG purchased Virengo Solar's Northeast Sales and Ops team, which puts NRG on track to be the #2 solar installer in the country by the end of the year. Before joining NRG, David served as CEO of International Power PLC, which is a UK-based wholesale power generation company. He also held positions at Lehman Brothers and ABB Energy Ventures. He received his BA from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and a JD from Harvard Law. David is the leading voice in the energy sector for utility transition. He's been a prominent, probably the most prominent voice from energy incumbents, calling for this transition towards a low-carbon energy future. He's led NRG's efforts in electric vehicle charging stations, carbon capture, and microgrids to make good on this promise. We're really excited to have you here today. Thanks for coming. Please join me in welcoming David Crane.
So I hope my mic is on. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Oh, most importantly, I'm obliged as a teacher to say that there are some seats in the front, so please feel free to move down, and you'll be more comfortable eating your lunch, and you'll be able to see the sweat on my brow. David, I not only want to welcome you, but I want to welcome you back, because you've been here before, and you were willing to come again. That's really great. So, and it's really good for us to keep hearing about your strategy and how it's being implemented and how it's succeeding, so that we can keep up on the industry as a whole as well. So I'm going to begin. I understand that you're a long-term thinker. So I'm going to go back 200 years in American history. Many of the people in this room know that there was a short story written at that time called Rip Van Winkle, about Rip Van Winkle. He wasn't a very hardworking fellow. His wife nagged him a lot. But he fell asleep for 20 years, according to the story. So even though we know that he slept for 20 years, we forget that he slept right through the American Revolution. And when he woke up, instead of seeing King George, he saw George Washington. Well, I want to suggest that we've had something of a revolution in the energy world in the last 20 years. And what I want to ask you is that if Amory Lovins or Vinod Khosla, who 20 years ago was at Kleiner Perkins, or Jim Rogers, who at that time was just starting as CEO at Synergy, and of course went on to Duke Energy, or Bill Ellis, who was on our faculty and was chairman of Northeast Utilities in 1995, if any of them or all of them had fallen asleep, and woke up in 2015, how would you explain to them how the electric energy industry has changed, what the broad outline is, what the outlook is, and why that puts you in a position of thinking of great changes at NRG?
Okay, just to make sure I'm getting this right. So they fell asleep in 1995. I mean, I just want to make sure I
good arithmetic,
yeah, it's
David.
good
You're
math.
a good start, yeah.
I'm good at 6th grade math. So if one of them were to wake up and so they were familiar with the industry as it existed then, I would say that there are probably 3 things that I would tell them that they wouldn't have expected. First is, I mean, in 1995, people were deep into dealing with environmental remediation on fossil fuel plants, dealing with sulfur and NOx. The Clean Air Act amendment had passed in 1990, and the industry had reacted as it always did by whining and saying, you know, we can't do it. And then, but once the law was passed, people got after it, and they were gone. But the idea that CO2 would come along and be the definitive issue of our time, not just as an industry, but for society, I don't think that was generally contemplated by anyone other than Jim Hansen, you know, in 1995. So first I'd say, look, there's a new environmental issue out there, and this is the mother of all environmental issues. And we're the biggest part of the problem, but we also have it within us to be the biggest part of the solution. So an even bigger part of the solution than we currently are part of the problem, and that has to do with us solving transportation's problem. So that would be the first thing I would say. That probably wouldn't shock them as much. The second thing I would say is that we are in a position 20 years later in 2015 to contemplate a post-grid world. That the very fundamental nature of the power industry, giant power plants, high voltage transmission lines, a distribution system that's based in the United States on 130 million wooden poles that visually scar our environment and are not up to the weather challenges of the 21st century, that entire system is under threat. No one would have contemplated that. And by the way, an electric system which has been defined by the United States government as the single greatest national security weakness that we have. You know, the electric system as it existed was, I think, voted by somebody as the greatest engineering feat of the 20th century, bar none. And it's gone from that now to being, I think, probably our Achilles heel as a society. So that would be the second thing I would say. And the third thing I would say to them is, and I would borrow, I mean, you must, being here in Connecticut, have Jeff Immel from GE come up here. And Jeff, if, you know, he has this riff, you know, he came up in GE, he didn't come up through the power systems, but I think he came up for a while in medical imagery technology. He said, in my 10 years there, I saw 4 generations of technology. He said, but in power generation, a power plant worker could have fallen asleep, you know, fallen into a coma, Rip Van Winkle in the mid-'70s, and they wake up in 2005, and they would have been back at work by noon. I mean, you know, there's the fact that, you know, the disruptive technological change that has basically changed virtually every other economic sector in our society is poised to completely disrupt ours, and that, you know, when I worry about who NRG is competing with in the future, I don't worry for a moment about, you know, Duke or any other major utility. I'm worrying about Google and maybe Comcast, maybe the big telecoms. You know, people who know what's going on inside the house. Is that a good answer?
It's pretty good. Should we have an applause meter? Just kidding.
No. Let's hold the applause.
Well, I'd like to pick up on your point about being able to contemplate a post-grid world. And one of the impossible things that you're trying to do is be in both worlds at the same time. Now, I have the privilege of teaching a course here every fall called Corporate Environmental Management and Strategy. I see a few alumni from that course right here in this audience. But even though I'm so interested in strategy, I have to say that inside I buy the argument that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
And that means that organizational issues are paramount and people issues are paramount. You've often said that it's going to be a long time that you're in both worlds, you know, in the fossil world and in the coming world of the distributed energy. So is this actually a complicating characteristic of what you're dealing with at NRG now, and as you try to bring both cultures forward?
Yeah, so can I answer both sides of that?
You bet.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the strategic side, then the human resource side. So strategically, yes. And look, you know, sometimes I'm called a visionary, and I say, no, I'm not a visionary, I'm a historian. Like, you know, if you want to see what's going to happen to the power sector in the United States, just look at what's happened to the power sector in Europe over the last 7 years, number one. I mean, the European utilities led by the Germans have experienced €1 trillion of value destruction as they did not respond to the world that was coming. €1 trillion. I mean, so to me, when people say, oh, you're some radical CEO, I'm like, no, the radical CEO is the one who's got his head in the sand or in some other part of his anatomy. And I use the his there because no woman CEO would be that close-minded. But, you know, I have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, and that to me means skating to where the puck's going to be. So I don't feel what I'm doing is radical. I feel doing nothing is radical. The second part of the history, of course, is the telecom sector. And I just took a cursory look at you know, how is it, I mean, because everyone in the room is probably too young to remember when telecom was deregulated in the mid-'80s. But you know, the mighty AT&T was broken up, and the sleepiest part of the whole value chain was the 7 baby bells. Yet as we sit here in 2015, the two inheritors of the earth, Verizon and the new AT&T, they started as Bell Atlantic and Southwest Bell, 2 of the 7 unloved baby bells. And if you look back at how they accomplished that over the last 25 years, it's not only not a heretical notion that you have to have your feet in both camps, but both companies, they certainly embraced the cell phone, which was obviously the disruptive technology there wholeheartedly, but they also consolidated the traditional space. And so what I would say on the strategic front, what NRG is trying to do, you know, when it comes to the wired home, the interconnected home, and if that's a software play, I mean, we're not going to match up with Google just on who's got the best, you know, software providers. But Google has no interest in the electric system. They don't understand it. I mean, our whole comparative advantage is that we do understand both systems better than anyone. And we're probably going into 20 years where they're coexisting with each other. So that's what I would say strategically. That's my pitch. You can poke holes in it. The human resource question, the mindset change. I mean, and anyone in the room who's considering going to work for a major utility, you should think long and hard about this because, first of all, we start as an IPP, right? So we start by wanting to, you know, disrupt utilities. So we're not, you know, we're not as much stuck in the primordial ooze as like a traditional utility is, but you know, we do, you know, we have sort of traditional power company, you know, points of view. That has been the most difficult thing, I would say. And even now, I would say the biggest human resource challenge that we have in NRG is, as you look around the company, and we've expanded rapidly over the last few years. I mean, I was just at a thing last week, an innovation lab, where we had about 80 people from all part of the company, and you could have shot a cannon through the room and not hit someone who was over 35 years old. So, you know, they were all next generation for us. And almost every one of those people, if not everyone, came to work at NRG because they saw us as what I like to think we are, a purpose-driven company that's trying to, you know, obviously do right by our shareholders, but also change the world in a positive way. But there's a layer of management. You know, there's a layer of management. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, because there's a person from human resources in the room, and you know, a CEO, you're never supposed to ever mention anyone's age. But there's a lot of the sort of middle to senior level managers at NRG are sort of in their 40s. They didn't buy into. I mean, they were there before I got there. They didn't necessarily buy into, you know, what I brought, and so you've got this idealistic generation of younger workers that want to change the world and do all these things. And, you know, then there's another layer above them who's not opposed to it, but they're like, hey, I got a budget to make. While you want to invest, spend some money on something that may pay off 10 years from now, if I don't deliver the numbers this quarter, and so definitely culturally, I think that's the biggest challenge we have.
So what do you do about it?
Well, you try and align everyone's interests. It's interesting. People are called. Right now, my simple thing, and this has to do with human resource application, capital allocation, is to think about what NRG is trying to do in this sort of. Don't tell anyone yet because the board hasn't heard this yet, but I'm going to tell them a little. I'm trying to get people to think of it in sort of 70-20-10. Purposes. We invest about $1 billion of capital a year, and probably 70% of that on average, it varies, is in our core businesses, primarily in the power plants, either major maintenance, environmental remediation, or new power plants. 20% is what I'm calling proven growth businesses, big solar, big wind, but high growth. And then 10% is what I would say is, again, to borrow from Google, but at an NRG scale, what would be moonshot. 10% of what we invest should be something that, if it hits, will really pay off. I know there's the workshop later today on electric vehicles. The total amount of money that NRG has invested in electric vehicle charging, I don't know, Phil, give me a number.
200 million.
Oh, geez, it's that high?
Now.
Okay. I was going to say 50 million. 200 million over like 6 years, though, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so 30 million a year. Anyway. But it doesn't make money. It barely makes revenue after 6 years. And that, to me, by the way, that's one of the advantages of if you're interested in energy innovation, going with a bigger company than a smaller, because we can outlive the valley of death. We can wear that for 6 years. I didn't know it was 200 million, Phil. We'll have to talk afterwards. But stop. I'll deal with you later. But the thing is, one of the things about electric vehicle charging is, we're completely subject to whether the OEMs sell, cars, whether Americans buy electric cars and, whether they sell them. One of the automakers was telling us a week ago that just to comply with the CAFE standards as they will exist by the year 2025, they see no technological alternative other than to be selling 25% of their vehicles as pure electric cars. That's, if it's a 16 million car market in the United States, that's 4 million cars a year. If we have the dominant national electric vehicle charging network at that time, we're going to be printing money, because it's and then, so part of me says that 10%, our company's stock is currently around 24 or 25. I'm not here to sort of turn into 28 or 29. I want to be doing some things that give us like a shot at making 250, a 10x. So that should be about 10% of our investment. But inside the company, you got the people working on the really new stuff that say, well, why are you investing in the, in the old plants? And I say to them, well, because they're the ones that are actually making the money. And then you have the people that work in the old plants are saying, why are we doing this new stuff? It's not delivering any cash. And I say to them, well, how much money do you want us to invest in a 40-year-old power plant that's nearing the end of its life? So you have to be a diplomat.
Of course. All right. Well, pretty soon I'm going to turn this over for the hard questions, the audience. I'm just the warm-up act here,
good.
But what I wanted to ask again about, with the big changes that are coming, some key states, New York and California comes to mind as key states, are looking at their energy regulatory dockets. The so-called Utility 2.0 question is what I'm going to ask you. The grid is changing, incentives need to change, and do you think that these first few dockets could really alter the whole business model of the energy companies, and might that alter your thinking in some way?
Well,
Worried about it?
Am I worried about it? there's so many, illogical things. I mean, just the idea that you have this monopoly-based system that's trying to perpetuate itself, and that as a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, I actually have to defend free market outcomes. But, it strikes me as surprising in 21st century America. But I'm just not sure that, I mean, every utility's, first goal in life, and I'm gonna dial this back because I know we're being videotaped and this is being live streamed, is to have a good relationship with its regulator. And one thing about this disrupted future I'm talking about, it sort of puts the electric regulator out of business as well. And so the regulatory infrastructure wants to reinforce the utility outcome. But when you start talking about that the solution in the future is energizing someone's home with solar on the roof, smart energy devices in the house, an electric car in the garage that's also serving as secondary storage for your electric system, that's a free market construct. I mean, the whole base of monopoly is we don't want 10 competing companies' wires crisscrossing each other across the landscape. But if you're doing it all at your house, I think that the biggest competition we face in terms of the end-use energy consumer is the do-it-yourselfers that go off to Home Depot and sort of set it up, themselves. But you have utilities trying to get that into rate base, and it makes no logical sense other than the fact that they've got a lot of stroke. I mean, you go down to Florida, the Sunshine State, third parties aren't allowed to put solar in there for no other reason that the Florida Power and Light, has a stranglehold on the regulatory system. And while they'll go off into other states and do interesting things in their state, people aren't allowed to compete. So what, to me, as I like to say, usually when talking to younger folks, because I expect everyone in the room that sort of senses this, is that, primary energy worldwide is a $6 trillion a year business. And it's based on fossil fuels. And in my experience, the people that run fossil fuel companies, whether they're producing fossil fuels or using fossil fuels like our end of the industry, not evil people, not anti-environment or anything, but they see as their first job in life is protecting that $6 trillion a year. And you going up against that $6 trillion a year status quo, you better come with game. And so that, to me, that's the biggest challenge. In that, while there are some companies like us that sort of firmly planted in the status quo, but ready to disrupt. Most are not. And you also have to keep in mind that most companies, the strategic outlook of the company can be directly tied to the remaining years that the CEO has in the position. So you'll see a company with a CEO that's 45 is going to be thinking 10, 15, 20 years. You got 58, 59, 60-year-old CEO. They're just thinking, I just want to keep this together for my remaining, 3 years or whatever. It's amazingly. I used to not believe this. I spent a short time as an investment banker, and I actually thought, the M&A bankers that would keep the ages of the CEOs, on a list on their, on the wall. I'm like, well, why, is it really that personal? It's that personal.
So with so many companies not being as progressive, it seems that regulators, such as in states with track records like New York and California, then really could change the game for them. And so how does that affect NRG?
Well, anytime the regulator's on your side, it's a good thing. And so, California is definitely, California is the cutting edge. You can expect in some ways, one should think of California as the world's largest microgrid. And it sort of follows the traditional pattern. What is sort of invented, deployed in California will percolate to the rest of the country. But even in California, the end-use electricity customer, is not eligible, is not available for competition. And so, I mean, so someone like us who sees as our advantage in the home solar space is that we should be able to go into a California household, and as everyone in the room knows, California is currently more than 50% of the national market for home solar. You know, I want to go in and offer a seamless solution. I want to say, here's the solar on the roof. I'm also going to be your system provider. I'm also going to, you know, have a backup generator here if that's what you want, or a battery solution, whatever you want. But there in California, you know, you're not allowed to do that. So the person's left sort of, okay, well, here's my bill from Pacific Gas and Electric, and there's always a risk that they actually persuade the regulator to put in fixed charges because I wanted to, you know, I wanted to produce my own electricity. And so, you know, California is a trend center, but it's not a perfect market.
Fair enough. All right, last question for me. I know it's hard to know the future, and I shouldn't put you on the spot as your hostess, but what the heck, right?
Yeah.
So we interviewed you in 2011 at our great online magazine, Yale 360. And in that interview...
Geez, what did I say?
That's what you should be worried about. No, he said, we believe that, this was 2011, we believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll be able to get power cheaper from the roof of your house than from the grid. That solar's, you pointed out how it's 0.1% of the market that will ultimately be 20 to 30%. So what a huge opportunity. Do you think that, what about the price of power, right? What about solar being cheaper from your roof than on the grid? How do you see that one now?
I said in 3 to 5 years?
You did.
Well, I think certainly by the end of 2000, yeah, by the end of that 5-year period, so by the end of 2016, I would say in half the states, that's a true statement. And at this point, to me, the bigger issue is, again, as probably everyone knows, I mean, we're buying solar panels at 60 or 70 cents a watt, which if you would just stand outside your house and hold it up like that at 70 cents a watt, I think that translates into about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's cheaper than any state in the country. But of course, you have to wire it in and do everything else. So right now, 60 cents a watt installed on your roof is turning into $3.50 a watt, where, you know, now you're up in 16 or 17 cents a kilowatt, which is what people in Connecticut pay, I believe. I'm not from Connecticut, but I think that's the rate here. So I think we're right there at the tipping point in a lot of states. The thing is, the capitalist system will eliminate or will dramatically reduce that difference between 60 and 350 very quickly, because it's all inefficiencies and friction in the system. I believe someone told me in Germany it's 220. And a lot of it's just to give you an example, I think it's still on average 90 to 110 days in the United States, depending on what state you're in, from the time a customer orders home solar to the time it's installed on their roof. There's nothing in American consumer society that takes that long. You can buy a house, you can buy a car in like a fraction of that time. And it's all, every municipality has different rules. This is a local government issue, even more than a state issue. The installer's got to go down, pull a permit, then you got to wait for the housing person or the town engineer to come. In Germany, the average install from the point of consumer decision to full install is 8 days. And as a result, it's 220 instead of 350. And that's Germany. That's high cost, high labor cost Germany. So, we actually thought about, we worked for a while with the X Prize people about, sponsoring an X Prize for next day solar, that would be aimed at the municipality that could figure out for their customers and get a certain amount of market penetration, how people could say at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, I want solar on my roof, and have it, turned on by 5 o'clock the next day. It should be possible. I mean, one of the things I'm passionate about, our company does pro bono work in Haiti. We put solar panels on hospitals and orphanages and schools, and we send volunteers teams down there, and we get the stuff assembled on site, and 3 days later we're turning it on. So if we can do it in Haiti For God's sake, we should be able to do it in the United States. So I completely. Well, I thought that you were going to hit me with one of my other whoppers, but that one I think is we're on track.
Oh, good. Well, anyhow, I'm very eager to turn to the audience and see what's on their minds. These are your millennials, right?
Yes.
They're going to change the world for us. So, no pressure. Who'd like to ask David a question or make a comment or anything?
Hi there, thank you so much for being there.
Can you just say your name and maybe if you're in a PhD program or something?
Sure. My name is Nikki. I am in the PhD program at the Forestry School, also working on an MBA here.
How did you know that? Okay.
I'm one of the alumni of Marion's course that she spoke about earlier. And my research is on utility-scale solar. And so I'm incredibly interested to hear your thoughts on utility-scale renewables versus distributed renewables. Because, as I'm sure you know, that's a hugely heated debate in a lot of different circles.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things from a political lobbying perspective is that, the solar industry has no effective lobby because its government lobbying organization, SEIA, is completely paralyzed between the utility scale people and the home solar people because the Achilles heel of utility scale solar is that you rely on the transmission and distribution system, which, it's just not a perfect world to be in if you're trying to disrupt someone's business that you actually your only route to market is through their system. And so the deck is stacked against you, number one. Number two, the renewable industry in a world of low commodity prices has to exploit the fundamental greed of the incumbent powers. So my point is that I think from the time natural gas prices peaked, which was, not to put too fine a point of it, was June 30th, 2009 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Since the long slide since then, natural gas is the largest input cost into the utility system. It's down 80%, in that time period. But the retail price of electricity spread across the country is up 20%. So the utility industry, while its main cost is going down, just constantly every year it increases its own price. But to compete against that greed, you have to be competing against the retail price of the electricity. So the problem with utility scale solar right now is that if there is no renewable portfolio standard, and states only pass Democratic states pass renewable portfolio standards when there's a Republican in the White House. When there's a Democrat in the White House, they don't bother, right? Because they assume the federal government will sort of support renewables. So there are no more renewable portfolio standards, and the lowest price I've seen at a utility scale solar auction is City of Austin last year had a price, and the low bidder bid 5 cents per kilowatt hour for solar, which is an obscenely low number, and they couldn't do it, so they ended up sort of defaulting. Then they went to the cover bid, which was a 6 cent. But with natural gas at $2.50 to $3, I can build a gas-fired combined cycle plant. You give me 3 cents, 3.5 cents, I'll build a gas plant, and no price on carbon, so I'll just build a gas-fired combined cycle. And so in a low commodity price environment, you still have the problem in terms of utility scale that it's not the cheapest option. And then you have to deal with its intermittency. So if the utility layers that on, and one of the things the utilities will never tell you is they'll always complain about, oh, this will destabilize the grid, but they'll never tell you how much it's destabilizing the grid or what's it worth to them for it to not be destabilized, or if you have a technology that's actually going to help them stabilize, they won't ever pay you for that. So you're dealing with this entirely opaque system, which is completely controlled by the people that don't want you to succeed. Not to be cynical about it.
Hi, I'm Michael Puckett. I'm a joint degree student between the business school and the forestry school, and I'm actually going to be starting at PG&E in September. So I'm coming at it from maybe a slightly different angle, but I was looking at, I was wondering about your comments about regulation and sort of the dampening of innovation that the regulation can sort of provide. But I also wanted to, I guess, challenge you on the other side of things that, looking at the California energy crisis, that I guess a poorly designed regulatory system can also lead to some problems of its own. I was wondering how you see in a perfectly competitive market, what you see the role of regulation being in a more competitive market.
Well, I mean, there is always going to be regulation because, in a commodity that society utterly depends upon, it's going to be regulated. I mean, I would like to say, and I know this is trite, is just to say that the regulatory environment, it'd be nice if it were a level playing field. But, it's not. And, the deregulation construct in California in the 1990s was obviously fundamentally flawed when they sort of deregulated generation, but said to the T&D utilities, here's your biggest expense, but you can't hedge yourself against it. So hopefully, they had learned from that. But I think the key is for them to sort of continue to apply principles of why is this a regulated industry? Why has this company, in your case, Pacific Gas and Electric, been given a legal monopoly, for a certain type of business? And if they continue to apply those principles, again, like in the electric vehicle world, you might see a situation where, if California sort of approved Pacific Gas and Electric, laying wires in various places to enable electric vehicle charging in more places, I don't have any problem with that. But when Pacific Gas and Electric, asked for an obscene amount of money to actually get in the business of, putting chargers in and having the customer interface, I would say, number one, why would they do that when other companies, at least 3 other companies, have said, we'll do this as a competitive business? And secondly, I would say, in the case of electric vehicle charging, where you're talking about transportation, PG&E's remit only goes as far as their service territory. It's a flawed outcome for an electric car person because there's not going to be any PG&E chargers outside of their service territory, but the car may go there. So I think you have to be reasonable about it, and I don't want to say anything bad about Pacific Gas and Electric because they're actually NRG's largest customer in terms of our big solar and some wind. But in terms of this sort of end-use energy customer, I think we've seen that Southern California Edison has come up with, sort of proposals, I think, maintain a better balance between what really can be in the competitive sector and what should be part of their franchise.
Fair enough. You had a question.
Yeah, Dave Christie, I'm a law student, and apologies, I came late, so you may have talked about this. But a barrier that I've always found a little odd to distributed generation is that people move a lot, and it doesn't seem like the distributeds are priced in properly at the house when you're putting it up for resale. Can you talk about why that lag exists and what can be done about it?
The area you're talking about, the average house is not owned by one person for the 20-year term of the lease. It's a very new area. And I saw one negative article about it, which almost seemed like it had been, I wouldn't have put, not Pacific Gas and Electric, of course, because they wouldn't do this, but the article I read almost looked like it was planted by, someone who was anti, solar on rooftops, but they were talking about how solar on rooftops had hurt the resale value of houses. And I think it was like, I don't know where I read it, it was either the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal or something. That was completely inconsistent with what we have heard from the field where, the limit, and this, again, limited data, early days yet, but that having solar on your roof enhances the value of the property and that 80 to 90% of the time, the new homeowner just assumes the lease. That's what I've heard, and It has not proven to be a huge problem in terms of anything we're doing yet. I would have actually thought it would have been more of an issue now, but it hasn't been. But I mean, I think we have to, you know, watch that closely, and it may vary from market to market as well. But if that question was based on the article I read, you know, I can't, because we disagree with the premise of the article that actually putting solar on your roof, I think in most places has shown to actually enhance the value of the home. But
We need some data, so there's a challenge for us, right?
yeah.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Thomas Selby. I'm a second-year joint degree between SOM and FES. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the role of financial innovation in this energy transition. People spend a lot of time talking about new technologies, but you need to be able to pay for those, and just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, financial innovation has come into the solar space. You know, well, look, let me start with the basic problem, is that renewables from the federal government perspective have usually been incented by, you know, messing around with the tax code, right? Tax credits, you know, production tax credits, investment tax credits. And the problem is that most companies that are doing the innovation don't have tax appetite. So you've got this situation where basically you're trying to encourage the radical innovators, but JP Morgan controls everything, because they are the tax equity market. You know, it's gotten a little bit wider now. And I saw Matt Arnold is here in the JP Morgan Sustainability. So you go up to Matt Arnold and say, Matt, you've got a stranglehold on on innovation in our space. But see what he says, and then you can tell him that I said hello. So an incredible amount of financial engineering has gone around this fact that everyone has to sort of torque their deals into, okay, tax equity goes over here, this goes over here. And it's really sort of wasteful from a society perspective. But, you know, that's what we've got. I mean, yeah, I'd rather have some, you know, incentives from the government than none at all. But I would say where the real key to future financial innovation stands, particularly in solar, is you know, is in disintermediating all the financial institutions. So, you know, you've got Mosaic out there that's crowdsourcing financing of solar. I mean, you know, anyone in this room put money in a bank, right? You're going to get, what, 0.1% interest or zero. I mean, in some countries it's going negative, right? Negative interest. I think the cost for us to get sort of solar debt financing, 6%, 7%, there's 600 basis points to play with. And, you know, it's not like understanding solar on a roof is risk. I mean, it's easy to understand. It's not, oh, you know, widows and orphans will be taken advantage of. So I think that's where I would be focused in terms of financial innovation is really going straight to the people, particularly as the millennials, you know, get more discretionary income, more savings, and they want to sort of park that in a place that that is purpose-driven as well as, you know, yield providing.
Let's look all around the room. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Jackson Salazar, I'm from the law school. I think you push on the mic. I think you alluded negatively to net metering before in terms of the grid access charges. What are the...
With the price of natural gas around $3, most coal plants in the country again. So can I make one final sustainability point?
Please do, yep.
So what I'd say about sustainability, one of the things that we're struggling with as a company is we want to be a leader in sustainability, but how far do we go? I mean, we started as sort of clean energy. I mean, I guess it'd be fine as if a company, we sort of say clean energy, replacing fossil fuels. We've done our part, you know, the rest of it, you know, other people will do, you know, going back to sort of Sokolo's wedge theory. But the more I think about it, the more I think that society is not, I mean, we as an industry, again, because we only focus on supply, we have not figured out what to do with, you know, stimulating demand for zero marginal cost renewable energy, particularly demand that is a little bit insensitive to when it comes. And so what we're definitely focused on now is this nexus between, we're already working that nexus. Obviously, transportation, tailpipe-less transportation, another source of demand for zero marginal cost renewable energy. And then the fourth one, which we haven't gotten into, is obviously being far more prudent in terms of waste disposal, whether it's, we've been interested. But to me, those are the four pillars of sustainability in terms of the human environment: clean energy, transportation, water production, and doing something more sane with our trash than we do today. But then, of course, there are two others, right? There's agriculture and avoiding deforestation. And so one of the issues we have as a company is defining how far do we go? What do we sort of get involved in? And I think that's an interesting thing, because there's synergies between all these different forms of sustainability, that can be captured. And if I were a student where you are, I think I would be exploring even the software. I mean, there's like 15 companies working right now on software on how to sort of do a fully automated microgrid, to dispatch in the proper way solar. And then when we're doing Richard Branson's island, and we're sort of developing the hierarchy there, and because Richard Branson doesn't want to sit around in the control room. He wants to be out on the solar-powered jet ski. But but I mean, even there, we're not integrating yet the water or the trash removal. I mean, on Necker Island, on his island, they basically take the trash off island, they take it to a different island, and they burn it there. And that's obviously not
in his backyard.
No, but I mean, he's sensitive to it. Sure. And I would say that the last and final point I'd make is that, you would expect this from a corporate apologist like myself. What you see in terms of what big corporations, the CEOs that get it, and it's very much, I think, individually led on this thing, is that corporations sit at the center of, let's call it, a big corporate ecosystem. You've got your suppliers, you've got your customers, you've got your employees in the locations, the communities where you are, and then you've got your investors. Ignore them because they don't really count. But on the other three fronts, you see that the real forward-leaning corporations want to affect the sustainability footprint of everyone who they come into contact with. I don't know if they say this publicly, but I mean, Apple tries to calculate what's the carbon footprint of every Apple device on the earth. And I think, at least aspirationally, they would like to take responsibility for it. You've got people moving into sustainability around their supply chain, clean energy, obviously where all the products are. And that whole movement is one I think that has to be strongly encouraged. If you look at everyone touched by major corporations, you're touching quite a broad range. And we can accelerate this sustainability revolution. So.
It is a great pleasure to have you here. I hope we will see you yet again. Thank you so much, David. I was spring break, and the question is how far to go.